The alarm ripped through the ship before I even opened my eyes. I fell out of my bunk, grabbed the wall to steady myself, and ran barefoot down the corridor toward the communication deck. Red light pulsed along the ceiling panels. Someone was shouting numbers. My hands were shaking before I even reached the door. Nathan Pierce was already at the main console when I got there, his fingers moving across the panel faster than I had ever seen him move. He did not look up. "Claire," he said, "we have a live signal. Deep space. Unknown origin. It is not one of ours." I dropped into the seat beside him and pulled up the feed. The signal was raw and broken, stretched thin across 1,000 different frequencies, as if whoever sent it did not care who received it, only that someone, somewhere, might hear. The translation matrix struggled for a moment, spitting out fragments. Then 3 words locked into place on the screen, repeating over and over. "Help us, please." I felt my stomach tighten. This was not a trade request. This was not a diplomatic greeting. This was a scream. My throat felt dry. I had trained for years, run countless drills, sat through endless simulations of first contact scenarios, and none of it had prepared me for the weight of a real voice, real fear, pressed into 3 simple words. "Get Captain Voss down here," I said. "Now." Ethan Voss arrived within minutes, still buttoning his uniform, his eyes sharp despite the early hour. He read the message twice before he spoke. "Where is this coming from?" he asked. Nathan pointed to the star chart glowing on the far wall. A cluster of points blinked in a sector we had barely mapped, far beyond any territory humanity had claimed or even visited. 7 planets, Nathan said, all showing signs of habitation. 4 of them have gone quiet in the last 6 hours. The other 3 are still transmitting, but barely. Voss stared at the chart for a long moment. Then he turned to me. "Claire, get everything you can from that signal. I want to know who is out there, and I want to know what is happening to them." I nodded and got to work, but my hands would not stop trembling. Somewhere out there, an entire civilization was dying, and they did not even know if anyone was listening. Voss called a brief meeting of the senior crew right there on the communication deck, refusing to wait for a formal briefing room. He wanted eyes on the raw data, not a summary written after the fact. Peter Lang, our chief engineer, arrived still wiping grease from his hands, and Emma Foley, our medical officer, came in holding a cup of tea she never got the chance to drink. Everyone crowded around the same screen, watching the same 3 words loop again and again. "Is it a trick?" Peter asked. "Some kind of trap designed to lure ships into unfamiliar territory?" Voss shook his head slowly. "If it is the strangest trap I have ever seen. Nobody baits a trap by begging." Emma stayed quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Whatever it is," she said, "we cannot simply listen and do nothing. Not to something like this." Nobody argued with her. It took hours to build a clearer picture, piecing together broken transmissions, drone footage, and fragments of a language none of us had ever heard before. Our ship's intelligence system, a calm synthetic voice we called Iris, worked through the noise, filtering signal from static. The story that emerged chilled everyone on board. The people calling for help were known as the Doran Alliance, a collection of peaceful worlds that had lived without any real conflict for generations. They had no standing armies. They had no weapons beyond what they used for mining and construction. They had built a life around trade, farming, and art, believing that violence was something they had left behind centuries ago. Then something called the Vantar Order found them. The Vantar did not come with demands. They did not ask for surrender. They arrived in massive dark vessels shaped like jagged spears, and they began taking the Doran worlds apart, one by one, methodically and without mercy. Their belief, translated as closely as Iris could manage, was simple and cold. Any civilization that could not defend itself did not deserve to continue existing. It was not anger driving them. It was philosophy. A cruel, calculated worldview that treated weakness as a flaw to be corrected rather than a trait to be protected. 4 billion people lived across those 7 worlds. By the time we intercepted their broadcast, 4 of the worlds had already fallen silent. I sat alone in my quarters that night, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. I kept thinking about my own home, about the quiet mornings and ordinary lives that people lived without ever imagining that somewhere out there, a knock on the door could mean the end of everything they knew. The next morning, the entire Fleet Council convened. I watched the meeting from the communication deck, relaying data as officials debated what to do. I expected long arguments, hesitation, endless deliberation. Instead, the discussion lasted less than 20 minutes. Admiral Grace Hollis stood at the head of the table, her voice steady and clear. She said that humanity had spent centuries arguing about right and wrong, about strength and mercy, and now we were faced with a species using strength as an excuse to erase the weak. She said this was not a moment for debate. It was a moment for action. The vote was unanimous. Within 18 hours, every available ship in Allied territory received new orders. Reserve fleets that had been resting in orbit for years were woken up and prepared for departure. Colonies that had never seen conflict were suddenly organizing supply lines and support crews. The entire structure of our civilization shifted overnight, all because a stranger's cry for help had reached the right ears. I was assigned to remain aboard our ship, the Solace, serving as part of the communication and coordination team. Captain Voss would lead our vessel alongside a small group of others toward the edge of Doran space, tasked with reaching the surviving worlds before it was too late. Before we departed, Voss gathered the entire crew in the main hangar bay, a rare thing for him to do. He was not a man who enjoyed speeches, and he kept this one short. "We are not going out there because someone ordered us to," he said. "We are going because we heard something no one should ever have to say alone. Whatever happens next, remember that." Nobody cheered. Nobody needed to. The silence that followed said more than applause ever could. The journey took 12 days. During that time, the ship buzzed with quiet tension. Nobody spoke about fear directly, but it was there, humming beneath every conversation. Soldiers checked their equipment more often than necessary. Engineers ran diagnostics on systems that were already working perfectly. Everyone needed something to do with their hands, because sitting still with your thoughts was its own kind of danger. I spent most of those days working with Iris, trying to build a stronger translation model, so we could communicate directly with any Doran survivors we found. Lucy Doyle, our linguist, worked beside me almost around the clock, her eyes red from exhaustion but her focus unshaken. "We are missing something," she said one night, staring at the data. "Their language has words for peace, for growth, for creation, but almost nothing for conflict. It is like they never needed those words before." That thought stayed with me long after she said it. What did it mean to build an entire civilization around the assumption that the universe would leave you alone? Emma joined us one evening, carrying a tray of food that none of us had remembered to eat. She sat down without being asked and looked over the translated fragments scattered across the table. "You know," she said, "back home we teach children that conflict is something to avoid, something dangerous. These people took that idea further than anyone ever has. They built their entire world around avoiding it completely, and it almost cost them everything." Lucy nodded slowly. "Maybe kindness without any strength behind it is just as fragile as strength without any kindness." None of us had an answer for that. We simply sat together in the quiet hum of the ship, letting the thoughts settle over us like a weight none of us wanted to carry alone. On the 6th day, Peter reported a strange fluctuation in our engines, forcing the ship to slow briefly while his team worked to stabilize the drive core. It was a small delay, no more than 3 hours, but it felt unbearable. Every minute lost felt like a minute someone down on those dying worlds did not have. "We are losing time," Voss said quietly, standing beside Peter as sparks flickered from an open panel. "I know," Peter answered, not looking up from his work. "Give me 3 hours and I will give you back a working ship. Rush me, and I will give you nothing at all." Voss stepped back and let him work. 3 hours later, exactly as promised, the engines hummed back to full power, and the Solace continued forward without losing another moment. On the 9th day, we picked up a new transmission, weaker this time, barely holding together. A voice, translated with effort, speaking directly rather than broadcasting blindly. "We do not know who you are," the voice said. "We do not know if you can help us. But if you are out there, please, do not let this be the end." Lucy grabbed my arm. "That is a real person," she whispered. "Not an automated signal. Someone is still alive down there." I relayed the message to Captain Voss immediately. He ordered us to increase speed, pushing the ship's engines beyond their comfortable limits. Every second mattered now. We arrived at the edge of Doran space on the 12th day, and the sight that greeted us was unlike anything I had prepared myself for. 3 planets remained, each surrounded by wreckage that used to be orbital stations and defense platforms, though the term defense barely applied since the Doran had built almost none. Vantar ships hovered near 2 of the worlds, dark and silent, like predators waiting for the right moment to finish what they had started. Voss did not hesitate. He gave the order to move our fleet between the Vantar vessels and the remaining Doran worlds, positioning us as a wall between the predators and their prey. It was a bold, almost reckless move, considering we had barely a fraction of the ships that had already engaged the Vantar elsewhere in the sector. A transmission came through moments later, this time from the Vantar themselves. Their voice was calm, almost curious, utterly without malice or hatred, which somehow made it more unsettling. "You are interfering in a natural process," the voice said. This species failed to prepare itself for the reality of the universe. We are simply completing what was always inevitable. Voss stepped forward and answered without hesitation. We do not accept your definition of inevitable, he said. Weakness is not an invitation. It is a responsibility for those who are stronger to protect, not exploit. There was a long pause before the Vantar responded. Then you have chosen to stand where you do not belong. The battle that followed was chaotic, loud, and fast, but I will not describe every detail of it, because those hours blurred together into something too overwhelming to fully capture in words. What I remember most clearly are the moments in between the chaos, the small human choices that mattered more than any weapon or strategy. I remember Nathan holding steady communication lines even as the ship shook around him, refusing to let a single signal drop because somewhere out there, someone was depending on that connection to survive. I remember Lucy translating pleas for evacuation in real time, her voice calm and clear even as her hands trembled, guiding frightened Doran survivors toward safe transport routes. I remember Captain Voss making decisions in seconds that would normally take hours of careful planning, trusting his crew completely, never once raising his voice even when everything around us seemed to be falling apart. I remember Emma working without rest in the medical bay, treating injured crew members from 3 different ships that had docked with us for emergency care, refusing to sit down even when her own hands trembled from exhaustion. I remember Peter rerouting power through damaged systems again and again, keeping the Solace moving even as warning lights flashed across every panel, never once suggesting that we pull back or slow down. And I remember the moment the Vantar ships finally began to retreat, not because they were defeated in some final, decisive stroke, but because they had underestimated exactly how far humanity was willing to go to protect people who were not even our own. The fighting did not end that day. It stretched on for weeks across other fronts, other systems, other desperate calls for help that came in from Doran outposts scattered further into the dark. But the tide had shifted, and it never shifted back. I want to be honest about something, because it would be easy to make this sound simple, like a clean victory with no cost. It was not simple. Ships were lost. Good people did not come home. Every world we managed to save came with a price that no celebration could fully erase. But every world we lost to silence before we arrived stayed with us just as strongly, a reminder of exactly why we kept moving forward instead of retreating into safety. By the end of the 4th month, the Vantar Order sent a formal request for communication, something they had never bothered with before. Their voice, when it finally came through, sounded different this time, less certain, almost confused. Why, the voice asked, would your people risk so much for beings that offered you nothing in return? Admiral Hollis answered that transmission herself, and I was fortunate enough to be present when she did. Because somewhere out there, someone was screaming into the dark, she said, and for the first time in their history, someone else was finally listening. The war ended not long after that exchange, though ending is perhaps too gentle a word. The Vantar withdrew from Doran space entirely, retreating deeper into unexplored territory, unwilling to continue a conflict against an enemy that refused every opportunity to give up. We did not claim the Doran worlds as our own. There was some discussion of it, quiet conversations among officials who saw opportunity in the aftermath, but Admiral Hollis shut that down before it could gain any real support. We did not come here to take, she said. We came here to answer a call for help. That is where our involvement ends. The Doran people, understandably, struggled to comprehend that decision. One of their elders, an older woman named Cyril, addressed our fleet during a formal gathering held on one of their surviving worlds. Her voice, translated by Lucy's improved system, carried a mixture of gratitude and disbelief that I will never forget. We had accepted our fate, she said. We believed that if the universe decided we were meant to disappear, then disappearing was simply the truth of things. We never imagined that strangers, people who owed us nothing, would choose to interrupt that truth simply because it was wrong. I stood near the back of that gathering, watching Captain Voss listen carefully to every word, his expression unreadable, but his eyes clearly affected by what he was hearing. When it was his turn to respond, he kept his words simple. We know what it feels like to be small in a universe that does not care whether we survive, he said. That is exactly why we could not stay silent when we heard you calling. The gathering fell quiet after that, a silence that felt heavier and more meaningful than any applause could have been. Afterward, Cyril approached me directly, her hand resting gently on my shoulder in a gesture Lucy later explained was a sign of deep respect among her people. You were the one listening when our call went out, she said. Lucy had told her that much already. I nodded, unsure of what else to say. Then it is fitting, Cyril said, that you are the one standing here now, at the moment our silence finally ended. I did not have words for that either, so I simply stood with her a while longer, watching the sky above her world, a sky that was no longer empty of hope. In the months that followed, humanity's presence in that region became something unusual, something that had never quite existed before. We were not rulers. We were not protectors demanding gratitude or loyalty. We simply remained available, a steady presence that the Doran worlds could reach if they ever needed help again, without any expectation attached to that offer. Lucy stayed behind for nearly a year, continuing to build stronger communication between our peoples, teaching Doran scholars how to construct their own long-range signals so they would never again have to scream blindly into the dark, hoping someone might hear them by chance. Nathan eventually returned home, though he told me once that he still checked deep space frequencies out of habit, unable to fully let go of the fear that another distress call might arrive and go unanswered if he was not paying close enough attention. Peter took a quiet posting near one of the surviving Doran worlds, helping rebuild their damaged orbital stations from the ground up. He told me once, over a brief transmission, that he had grown fond of the place, that there was something satisfying about repairing what had almost been lost forever, instead of only building new things from nothing. Emma stayed with the medical teams a while longer as well, training local healers in techniques their world had never needed before, sharing knowledge freely, without asking for anything beyond a promise that it would be passed on to others in turn. As for me, I returned to my position aboard the Solace, continuing the same work I had always done, listening to the quiet static of space, waiting for whatever might come next. Most nights, there is nothing, just the ordinary hum of empty space, endless and calm. But every so often, the noise floor shifts, and Iris flags something worth examining, and my entire body goes still before I even see the translated words appear on the screen, because I know exactly what it sounds like when an entire civilization is dying and does not expect anyone to care enough to listen. We always answer, though. That is the part of this story I hope people remember most clearly. Not the battles, not the tactics, not even the difficult cost that came with every decision we made. Just this simple truth. When the galaxy sent a desperate distress call, humanity did not hesitate, did not calculate the benefits, and did not ask what we would gain in return. We simply answered because somewhere out there, someone needed us to. And as long as there are people willing to listen for that call, no matter how distant, no matter how faint, that answer will never change.